Welcome to the Black Sparrow Media Internet Broadcast Network.
You are listening to Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a podcast about Linux, open source, and amateur radio for everyone. Now here are your hosts, Russ, K5TUX, Cheryl, W5MOO, and Bill, NE4RD.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. You have tuned in to episode number 482 of Linux in the Ham Shack, the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet. And tonight you've tuned in for our deep dive episode, for welcome in for that. And we're just going to kind of jump right into it. We had a little week off because I was under the weather, so we're back to it. And thanks for tuning in for hopefully some information and maybe a little entertainment. And then we'll let you get about the business of the rest of your life. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves before we dive in. I'm Russ, K5TUX.
I'm Cheryl, W5MOO.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD.
All right, so our deep dive topic for the night, Linux networking on the command line. Now, Bill, you said you had a seed of an idea from something you saw on Reddit or somewhere else that we should maybe cover some of the command line utilities that help you navigate the world of networking and processes on a Linux machine. And so we got a few things lined up here that we're going to talk about, some commands, tell you what they do, how to use them. And most of these have a lot of flags or switches or whatever you want to call it that allow you to do all kinds of nifty things with them. But it should make your life a little easier when it comes to managing your Linux box, specifically in the networking and process space with some CLI tools. So do you want to start off with the first one here? We're starting off with network configuration. One thing we're not going to do in this episode is dive into firewalls specifically. That's a whole other topic. It's certainly network and process related, but it would take way too much time to do on top of the sort of shallow deep dive, if you will, that we're going to do tonight. So the first thing we want to talk about is the sort of current world of managing your network interfaces. So go ahead and start, and we'll see where we get.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and say I kind of got the inkling for this topic on an article that was basically posted last year in 2021 on the Red Hat site called entitled 7 Linux Networking Commands That Every Sysadmin Should Know. And I was just kind of digging around in it, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize that I shouldn't be using ARP and netstat and stuff like that anymore. Why the hell not? I
use ARP
I know
100 times a day.
I know. Oh, I didn't realize there's new commands for all this stuff as well in there using the IP command. So I was like, well, this might be a good refresher not only for our audience but also for me, just because I haven't really. I mean, you throw in a live CD these days, and almost everybody's set up for DHCP at their home, so they don't really think about the goriness of networking, unless you start to install like servers and stuff like that in Linux. And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff kind of comes in hand when you want to do some stuff on the command line where you're not necessarily installed with the, fancy GUI and, network config manager right on your desktop that you could just go in and say, oh yeah, I want to add my wireless config. I want to add my Ethernet configuration. And so on and so forth. So I thought this might be just a kind of a good primer or even a reminder of what's out there, and even equivalency in some of the commands that maybe some of us, users that have been, in Linux for quite a while are used to using, like ARP, netstat, and ifconfig and stuff like that. Where there's other commands out there that also supply the same information, if not better, organized in display, because obviously this is an evolution of network tools that are out there. But yeah, we kind of split it up in a few different ways. We started with the network configuration, and then we go on to network tools, and then we're going to talk about some other tools. But the first tool we have is part of the configuration setup, and that one's called NMCLI. And what that is a command line tool for controlling the network manager. And I think a lot of people are familiar, at least, with the network manager, because that's literally the GUI that's sitting on top for most of the modern distributions. Although some do use the other one that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, called NetPlan, which I think is that the Ubuntu one that you see?
I believe that is the newer Ubuntu one, yes. And I think other things use it too. Yeah,
so you might run into either one of these things with your distribution, depending upon what actually is kind of like installed by default. So you'll most likely have one of these two. And if you just go into NMCLI and you just happen to type the command, you'll actually get all your existing connections will just go ahead and pop up in the console first, which kind of gives you an overview of everything that's already configured. And from this point here, you can actually do some configuration of your connections. Like right now, mine's showing my wired connection, my IP address and routing, and also the IPv6 addressing and routing as well. And then on this particular computer, I have Tailscale on it, so it does show the Tailscale device and whether it's connected and how it's addressed and routed as well. Maybe you can go into a little of the details, Russ, on the actual network manager configuration, because I think it goes quite a bit deeper than just the CLI.
I try to stay away from NMCLI and the network manager if I can. I mean, literally, if it's not in the GUI being used to configure like the VPN configuration or just your interface configs, I don't tend to use it unless I have to. I sort of like doing it the old Debian way, and a lot of my machines are Debian, so I have like the interfaces script and stuff like that for doing this. So I might have a little insight, but what exactly are you trying to get to as far as like the actual configuration files and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can go over a little bit about the command. Some of the things you can do within the NMCLI is obviously you can take a look at the status of the configuration, the status of your connections. You can set your host name. A lot of people, if they're not given a way to set the host name, they're either doing it the old-fashioned way, which is host name or host. So you can actually set your host name in here. Permissions, you can change your logging level for all your configuration changes. As well, you can turn on and off connections as well via this through NMCLI networking, and then on and off. I'm trying to see, I haven't actually used this as that much. I've edited the configuration files by hand, and then I found out that there's a nice little command line tool that kind of goes along with it. So normally I go in and edit the conf file that sits behind all of this stuff. But the NMCLI actually allows you to interact with that and reset and reload the configuration based upon your configuration changes to ensure that, especially if you have a server or something like that, that your configuration works.
It does. If you just type the NMCLI command, you get a list of your interfaces. It's kind of like doing ifconfig or ipconfig, one of those. You do get the base information, your ARP address, your INET4, your INET6 routing, so on and so forth. And you also get a list of other devices that aren't necessarily in use, anything that's disconnected, any tunnel interfaces that aren't in use, your loopback, stuff like that. So just the basic command is great. And for most of these, if not all of them, a -H or a --help will get you important information. The configuration for Network Manager is under /etc/network manager, capital N, capital M. And there's conf files in there, .d directories where sub configuration files will be. They're numbered in the 10-20- for order of reading and stuff like that. So those kind of conventions will travel through when you look at this. And if you look into any of the files that are defined, you should be able to. The syntax is pretty straightforward. It's a lot of human readable type stuff. It's actually kind of in the style of sysconfig or syscontrol. The syntax is very similar.
I'm digging down into mine right now.
Yeah, there's not a lot in mine on the particular machine I'm on, because this is one that actually uses. This is an Ubuntu box that uses Network Manager and the NMCLI and stuff. There's stuff in Dispatcher, stuff in Comp, stuff in DNS Mask for doing DNS. You get your up scripts, your down scripts. And let's see, I have a connection called wired.nm connection. I think that's what was set in the GUI. I called it wired. So that's where your configuration will be, and you can see the config blocks in there and everything, what the address is, and it's all pretty human readable. So you can get a lot of information just by looking at these comp files. But again, it's probably an overly complex system for stuff that most people won't even have to dive into.
Yeah, like the only reason I say that you might need this is, like, let's say you're on a server, which I install a Fedora server quite often on Pis and small boxes. And let's say you want to set something like your wireless configuration while you're in the command line. This is a good place to actually do that, because if you go into NMCLI device, and then you can actually look and see what the Wi-Fi can see. So kind of very similar to what's shown when you say, I want to see all the Wi-Fi networks that are nearby. You can do that all via the command line as well. You can also do the connect, a Wi-Fi connect via that as well, which is just very helpful on a command line only box where you need to set that. So this could be a very useful command if you're using systems like Fedora for sure uses Network Manager. Arch uses Network Manager. I believe Debian does by itself. But in the Ubuntu and in Pop! OS, I noticed that they use the other one, which is NetPlan.
I noticed on my particular machine, which I think is a jammy box, it's using NMCLI or Network Manager, but NetPlan is also installed. But if you do like a NetPlan info or a NetPlan get all, it doesn't show anything because it's not actually using it. But the command is there, so you can see what it does and you can see how to use it. And of course, the man page is there as well. So lots of information there using man and info. Let's see if there's an info file for it. Oh yeah, sure is. Yep. Lots of gory details on NetPlan. Same with NMCLI. So.
Yeah, and I think NetPlan basically sits on top of Network Manager anyway. So, but I did notice that on the Ubuntu or the Pop! OS box, I didn't have NMCLI available to me.
Oh, that's interesting. If it's sitting on top of it, I mean, of course, like I said, it's
Well, you also have System D, Network D, or System D has its own network. So that's like the other side. So your two different network renderers are Network Manager and System D, Network D.
The softer side of network management. Yeah.
Yeah. The obscurity of network management. But yeah, I think that knowing that the fact that these commands exist, especially when you're in the server environments, are kind of useful, because you can set all kinds of stuff with the tools we're going to talk about a little bit later, but like that does not impact the configuration when you reboot the box.
Right, unless you do something to write those config files out and make the changes persistent. But yeah, so that's what all the backend config files for. And like I said, the NMCLI one is in the sort of systemd scripting type, syscontrol type config files, and then NetPlan uses YAML, which the YA, of course, stands for yet another. So YAML is yet another markup language, and it's just another way to make people learn something that it's already been done 100 different times. But so if you're into like XML or text file scripting or JSON or anything like that, this is different, just to be different. So
yeah, yet another configuration tool utility, right?
Yep, exactly.
YACUT. Yakut.
Yet another reason to go insane. What is that? Yeah, YART-G?
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of like just to understand the fact that you do have a command line utility that allows you to edit the conf files and the YAML files via the command line without actually opening up your editor and assuring yourself that you have put in proper syntax in your conf file as well. So these are kind of two useful command line utilities or command line interfaces to that networking manager, whether it's network manager or it's systemd network D, that are very useful to know, especially if you're deploying server-based installations where there's no UI to actually interact with the networking, or where you have an instance where you do not have a DHCP server, or you're connecting to a Wi-Fi on a server, a little server box, that's a Raspberry Pi or whatnot. And the only access you have is through the console to start with. So I think it's useful to know that these are going to be the utilities that you'll probably use that will make your life a little bit easier than having to edit the conf file. I know the first time I went in, I was editing the conf files and then rebooting the box, and it would have saved me a little bit of time if I had to like, oh yeah, I didn't realize there's actual tools that I can interact with them and change the things live and not have to reload the things manually, or just restart networking or whatever. But these tools can help you actually live change it and make those changes persistent.
Yep, very good. And of course, if you're in a GUI environment, then a lot of these commands are what's being done in the back end, and it's just being obfuscated by the graphical utils. And Network Manager actually shows up, I think, by name in GNOME on top of Ubuntu and stuff like that, but not NetPlan. So it's all configured on the back end if you're going through the desktop environment. But it's all using the same utilities.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to tools, because I think this is kind of where I kind of got a little bit more of an education.
Yes, and I'm doing like a side-by-side comparison of the ARP command versus the IP neighbor command. And yeah, whatever, they're the same thing.
I did notice that the IP neighbor command comes up much quicker. I don't know if you noticed that on your network.
It does seem to come up a little bit quicker too, but they're both pretty fast. So
yeah, I mean, I used to always do an ARP TAC A is normally what show all addresses.
That's what I do. Yeah.
There you go. Old school stuff. Yeah, and the IP neighbor kind of already does that. So yeah, we're talking about the IP command. So if you just type IP, and of course you can do man.ip or man space IP and get a manual or info, like we learned a few episodes ago, right? That's the other man is the info.
The more detailed man than man.
The more detailed man, yes.
It's the man's man.
So yeah, so ARP for all of you old guys, right, is the address resolution protocol. And that basically shows all your network, your layer 2 addresses, all your MAC addresses that you can hear from your interface. We used to do the ARP TAC A, which shows all addresses that you can hear. And sometimes this would help if you needed to statically assign an IP address to a MAC address that didn't have an IP address. And I think that's about the only thing I've ever used it for, beyond just general troubleshooting of broadcast networks. And I think that's probably maybe you can address some of that too.
The ARP command or IP command?
ARP.
Yeah, I mean, literally, if I'm not typing ARP A just to see if my pings are actually receiving or if there's a who is on the network, then I never use it for anything but that.
So yeah. I mean, I know when a lot of the stuff I think isn't as common anymore because most things are smart enough now that they grab their own addresses. But I've generally, if you plugged in a device that cannot get its own address, and there's no other way to talk to it, let's say it doesn't have an interface, but it does have a MAC address, you can assign a local, private network address that you can route to locally against a MAC address using the ARP command. And I'm assuming you can do the same through the IP command as well. Although I haven't tried that.
I believe you can create what's the name for that thing? There was it's like a static ARP, but there's a bogus ARP, basically. Creating a bogus ARP for being able to create a reachability if the ARP actually isn't coming through. I haven't found too much useful to do with that, but it's a thing that you can do.
Yeah. So I can't type tonight. So, and I got two computers in front of me, so it's like kind of confusing. I'm like, which keyboard am I touching? But yeah, you can see on your IP neighbor, and let's just I'm going to do an ARP-A just so I can see. So the nice part about IP neighbor as well, I guess that's the same. Yeah, ARP-A also shows the IP addresses. You'll see devices that don't have IP addresses that you can see their layer 2 address. So that's kind of an indication that it's not getting an address, but yet it's on your broadcast network, so you can see it within your network. And again, you can statically set that address for sure using ARP, but I'm not sure how to statically assign one when using IP. Can you do that through IP? Okay. You said something. Is that bogus address or fake address or something? Yeah,
bogus
like that?
ARP. Yeah, something like that. It's a term I haven't used in a long time. I just did something really weird. It turns out that, and this may be useful for somebody, but if you use the -J flag in IP, then the results come back in JSON format. So if you do IP-J neighbor, you get the table back in JSON.
Oh, that's interesting. Geez, we're learning all kinds of stuff here on this. So yeah, so you might not have any use for it, but I think knowing at least that there is an alternative to using the ARP command is useful. The if config command, or I don't know, is IP config? I thought that's only Windows.
It is only Windows. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, IP config is a Windows thing. So if config is from the NetTools project, and it is normally how you would see your addresses. Or, I'm typing the wrong thing again. Config. Oh, I really can't type. There we go. Yeah. So that shows your IP addresses and everything else for each of your interfaces. As well, if you use the IP command, you can just do IP space address, and that will show you, again, all of the addresses for all your devices, as well as how they're numbered in the system. And then if you do IP link, you can also see, I believe that shows the link status of each one, where your if config kind of wraps all that stuff up together. So it's a little bit of a separation inside of the IP command, but I believe the IP command does show a little bit more verbose information as I'm typing it and looking through it.
And the J works for all of these commands. If you want any of the stuff back in JSON because you really like to read JSON, you're good to go.
So yeah, if you're writing your own little tool to sit in front of this, that's probably an easy way to consume that data instead of actually having to parse out fixed field lengths and stuff like that.
Did you talk about the IP netconf?
No, I did not.
An IP netconf is kind of neat. This is getting really down into it, but it shows you actual like TCP and IP and like OSI model stack information about links, like whether they're in forwarding state, whether proxy neighbor is on, whether they're in loose RP filter mode, stuff like that. So this is really down into the TCP IP stack part of your interfaces. But if you really want to see how complicated things can be, you can try something like IP netconf.
Yes.
Did you try it?
Yeah, I just did. That's pretty cool. That definitely more information than most users actually need, but interesting nonetheless.
The first thing that comes across in those links is the forwarding state of the interface, which might be the most useful bit of information that it returns. Because if you find that if your forwarding is set incorrectly or something like that, you may not be passing traffic or anything. So it might give you some insight.
Yeah. I guess we'll do the IP route next, because that's going to be the same as your route show, right? The route show. Let's see, no route, just route, right?
Just route. Yep. They're not exactly the same, but they're very similar.
Yeah, IP route. So yeah, if you're used to using route, it does show a table a little bit differently than the table you see when you do IP space route. However, it does contain the same information although it's very well, the IP route is more, I guess you would say,
Succinct.
yeah. So it just basically shows you the default route instead of breaking out the default route into your underscore gateway and then your generated mask for it, which would be your 0.0.0.0 address, and so on and so forth.
Right. IP route
yeah.
shows you in CIDR instead of all broken out. So
yeah, and the nice part is if you want to look at more information on the route command inside of IP space route, you can actually just do man IP space route, and you will get all the details to see how to show your route, flush your routes, or do anything else that you need to do, like maybe even add a static route. This is useful if you need to, let's say you have multiple VLANs that you're connected to and you have multiple IP addresses and you want to control the routing between those addresses from the local machine that's connected across those. You can do that all within IP route. And that's about the only thing I think of that you would actually need that for, specifically on a Linux box, unless you're actually, doing specific, using your Linux box as a router.
I guess it's important to note here that IP is a command that can do sets as well as gets. In other words, you can change information as well as retrieve it. So it's a configuration utility as well as an information portal.
Yeah, absolutely. So it gives you a lot of information, and then you can also set it. Now, like we said at the beginning, these sets, if you set something here, it's not persistent. So if you reboot, none of the stuff you changed here will be persistent. You need to make sure that these get back to the configuration using something like NMCLI or NetPlan, and to ensure that the data is persistent or the settings are persistent across reboots. I guess we can talk about netstat. Netstat again. Netstat, what TAC A is what the general use is.
I use for me, my go-to is netstat-ANP. Yeah, that's the one I always use because it gives you the data in numeric format. It scrubs the DNS lookups, and it gives you the name of the process associated with each port.
Ah, yeah, that's good. I like that. Now, can you do the same with the SS, huh?
You can give SSANP, and wow, that's a crazy output on that. That doesn't seem particularly useful.
Yeah, I'm thinking there might be a different switch for SS, but SSS listed as like the newer version of the command for netstat. So there's a SS TAC E, which is extended, which might cover what you're talking about. Let's see here. Yeah, it shows which service is associated to which port.
Yeah, there's lots of information that gets dumped out of -E. Yeah, that's nice. Can you get that in JSON?
I don't know. Let's try. Let's see. SS TAC EJ, right?
Yeah,
no, it does not like J. No. You would think, right? It's like, it's got to add it in there. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of different information you can find from that. Netstat or SS is very useful for knowing which applications have which ports open, what is actually connected to those ports. It's very good for troubleshooting any type of connectivity issues where you may or may not have an application connecting to a specific service. Let's say you had WSJTX up and you had your UDP server running on it. You could verify that it's actually running from that particular service or not running. So if you're sending messages and it's not receiving anything, or it's sending messages and you're not receiving anything, this would be your go-to to kind of see if the services are actually starting up and they're actually connecting and launching on the correct ports. So it's very useful information, I think, once you get down into kind of that area of the net stack where you're looking at application protocols and seeing exactly where they're running from. And again, that's about the only time I've ever used it, when I'm trying to troubleshoot if some service is starting, specifically like, even recontrol D, you can always do a PS, TAC, whatever, AUX or EF or whatever, and look for the process and see if it's running. But if you wanted to see actually what port it actually came up on is listening for or transmitting from, you can always check using netstat or SS for that particular information.
Yep, absolutely. SS is kind of a new one on me. I've only used it recently, but it's nice. I like it. And it's a really short command as opposed to netstat. So
yeah, less characters to type, so totally more efficient, right?
Exactly. Efficiency above all.
Absolutely. Well, you want to talk about firm, because this is something new to me, because I don't really mess around with that.
Okay, the only reason I wanted to put firm in here is because sometimes if you're using IP tables for your firewall, making your firewall rules in IP tables is or making them persistent rather, is kind of a pain. You can set up scripts in your IF-up down and stuff like that, and there are utilities called like IP tables save and IP tables restore and things like that. But that just seemed like fairly cumbersome to me, and then I found this utility, which is actually a syntax wrapper called firm, F-E-R-M. And if you install firm, it comes with a sort of quasi-sensible default configuration. It's very easy to figure out. And it gives you a sort of human-readable configuration syntax that overlays on top of IP tables that allows you to read and write IP tables rules. It's basically you put the rules into firm.conf or the conf.d like subconfigurations, and then it writes out the IP tables rules underneath, so you don't have to deal with configuring IP tables directly. And then it runs as a service too. It's in systemd or whatever whether you're sysv or systemd or whatever. And you can set it to auto start at boot up and everything. So it makes IP tables rules configurations persistent. I just found it really useful. I don't want to really go into firm. The syntax should be pretty straightforward if you look at the default config file. And it just makes configuring and auto starting your IP tables rules really simple. So I find it a handy utility, and I pretty much put it on every server that I run now. It just makes my life easier, and it'd probably be very easy to integrate into, like a Chef playbook or Ansible or Puppet or any of those too. So that's all I really wanted to say about firm, but it's out there. It's cool.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. So we're going to move into other tools. Now, some of these are kind of troubleshooting tools, and then some are useful for diagnosing certain problems or symptoms or issues that you may or may not be having. So some are going to be pretty plain and simple, like our very first one, which is ping. And most people are pretty familiar with ping, right? It's you send an ICMP echo request to a network host. And there are several flags depending upon which operating system you're using, but you can send a ping that goes to a certain address. One thing I've used in the past, and again, this would be dating me, right, is the you ping the network broadcast to basically get all the ARP addresses to come back to you.
Most machines will be happy with responding to a broadcast ping. And by the way, you have to do broadcast pings, ping-b as root. You can't do it as a regular user.
Yeah.
And, that can definitely, because if you're trying to find a rogue out there on the network and you're like, oh, what the hell IP address, or you configured something and it's like DHCP and you can't figure out what address it is, a ping-b can definitely help you out.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're on a switched network, a managed switched network where, you're not going to see the traffic from every other port. But if they're in the same broadcast domain, you can ping the broadcast and get everybody to say, "Oh yeah, I'm here. Hello," and then you'll hear them all. But yeah, it is a slightly obtrusive ping. So generally it would require elevated privileges and knowing exactly what you're doing, because you shouldn't do that by any means on a regular basis or any other reason, just to do basically network detection for devices within your broadcast. Another great tool is traceroute. I believe in Windows is traceRT.
I did want to mention the other thing I put in the ping command, which was the -f flag. That's another thing you probably shouldn't do. But one thing ping-f does, it's called a flood ping. It basically there's no wait time on the pings. It just sends pings out to a host as fast as it can send them and then comes back. And this is particularly good for finding hardware issues, like actual layer one problems on your network, if you've got like a bad cable or a port that's flaky or something like that, a flood ping will show that error really quickly, where a normal ping will not, because there's enough time and enough latency in the network on a regular ping to get those pings back, and everything looks fine. But if you flood ping it and you're starting to get a lot of packet loss, you might want to look at your cables.
Yeah. Does that require elevated privileges as well or not?
I think it does. I think it is a root only thing.
Let's try 192. 127. Oh, yes. Not allowed for user. Yes, it does require privileges.
Yeah, which is sensible considering what it does. Yeah, the flood is a literal flood. It is flooding your network. But like I said, I've found more than a few bad cables or bad crimps using that with hosts that look like they're operating normally, but you're getting weird behavior. If you send it a flood ping and you're getting a lot of packet loss, yeah, you've got a problem.
Yeah, and like just to give you an idea, I just pinged my my file server here for less than 1.5 seconds, and it did over 8,500 packets. So it's a lot of packets all at once.
Yep, absolutely. It has its purpose though.
Yes. Don't abuse that. So it'd be bad.
If you're on your own network, go for it. If you're on somebody else's network, maybe think twice.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to traceroute. So traceroute, like we said, is available. Yeah, pretty much built in. It's I've only run across a couple of systems that didn't have it installed by default, but it's so easy to install. And it's a great utility because it can show you basically how you get from A to B. So let's say you want to see how your network traverses to google.com or lhspodcast.info. You could do a trace route against that. A couple of the flags that are important there is there's one for turning off DNS resolution, just because that normally slows things down. I think that's D, isn't it? If I remember correctly. N. Okay. Yeah. No name. Yeah. Named. Yeah, whatever.
I think of N
name
as
resolution.
Numeric, generally.
Yeah, numeric. Yeah.
I don't know what it actually means, but I always think of -N as numeric. So
trace route. Now there you go. What do they call it? N. Well, it says do not try to map IP addresses. So it doesn't have a numeric thing there. But anyway, that's what you want to use, and that basically will prevent it from actually wasting time trying to DNS resolve routers and stuff like that, which not every ISP or any peering network or backbone network will have an IP or have a DNS resolution on the IP addresses for their routers and stuff like that. I remember we had to do that for all of our routers inside of Time Warner when I was doing that, which was always fun because you had to make sure that you had forward and reverse DNS set up for every interconnect. It is kind of tedious and a pain in the butt, so a lot of places don't do it. So turning that off or using that switch, that minus N, lowercase n, does turn off name resolution. So you'll only get IP addresses. And of course, like most of the time, if there's some sort of network traverse or what would you call it?
If there's a transit issue or something like that, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, when you go into a private network and you can't actually reach the host, but it's traversing the network and it gets to the host anyway. So if you have some sort of private network, yeah, you'll see some stars, and then you'll maybe get to the destination, and that's normally at the beginning and the end, because there's certain portions of the network that generally are not necessarily like if you do any type of NAT, the network address translation, those kind of areas there will not resolve, but it knows there's a hop that exists. It's just that it can't resolve anything from that hop. So like you're going to see that occasionally, and it won't come back with an address either. So don't be surprised, and don't assume that's a problem. That's been around for as long as NAT has been around.
Traceroute can also help you find network loops and stuff like that, because you'll get a lot of bounce backs. You'll also find if there's a route that's bogus or something, or a transit hop that's going in a direction that you don't want it to. There's also a TTL that you can only do 30 hops with a trace route. And generally speaking, if you can't get from point A to point B in 30 hops, there's some kind of issue. So it's a great diagnostic tool and widely used as a network resource.
So I think we should change the order of these a little bit, but maybe, I don't know. What do you think? So like the next one we have on the list is TCP dump, and this is really for analyzing the data that's going across your particular connection, your whether that be your Ethernet interface or your Wi-Fi interface. It allows you to see all the TCP traffic that comes across. And I think you had a second command here, T-Shark. I don't think I've used that one before, so maybe you can enlighten us on that.
T-Shark is the CLI version of Wireshark. If you're familiar with Wireshark, which is a utility you can download on Windows and other things that has a graphical environment, it's a network packet sniffer. It writes things out in PCAP files, and also will reconstruct PCAP files and show you network conversations. T-Shark is the CLI version of Wireshark. I don't know if it's as robust as Wireshark, because Wireshark can do things like if you have all the packets recorded from like a SIP conversation, you can actually play the phone call and stuff like that. With the PCAP file, but I don't know if T-Shark can do that. It might be able to, but it's, like I say, it's just the CLI version of Wireshark. So if anybody's familiar with that, that's what it is. It's just kind of a more robust TCP dump. It has a different configuration syntax, but they basically do the same thing.
Yeah, and so this will only be traffic that you can actually hear from your particular connection. So now in the olden days, but probably you use this probably more than someone like a regular user would, because as an ISP, you can also, if you're troubleshooting someone else's connection, you can mirror a port on a switch and watch all the traffic that occurs on another switchboard. And I'm sure you've had to do this.
I've had to do that many times. Yes, where you can have one port that actually is fed the same packets that go to all the other ports on a switch, a managed switch, for example. And that's really handy for debugging, because you're going to get all the traffic going everywhere through that switch, no matter where its source is and what its destination is. And if you're trying to troubleshoot network topology, that's really very handy.
Yeah, and these are really cool utilities that you can use on the command line again. So, there are GUI utilities, but if your only, user interface is actually the command line, these are kind of the go-to utilities for that particular activity. And, depending upon what you're using it for, obviously, if you're in an ISP where you may need to, do something a little more interesting against other traffic, you probably use something a little more robust, probably GUI based, because it is a little bit better, easier, and quicker to rebuild the traffic. Because I've used a Wireshark for years, and it's a great utility for the GUI. But I haven't used T-Shark, so I might have to check that out just for personal information.
All right, cool.
So the other one you have here is Nmap, and I recall this as kind of the port scanner. The very first everybody had Nmap utilities to check their connection to see if they had open ports that they shouldn't have had and stuff like that. And this has kind of become pretty much in everybody's toolbox as a network guy or a server admin, to kind of ensure that you have your IP tables all set up. You're not exposing services that you should or should not expose. Like if it's just a web server, it should only have port 80 and port 443, and ensuring that you're not exposing your SSH ports or any other ports of interest that could be hit by some port scanner, which is most likely another Nmap out there running rogue or running in nefarious mode. Searching for anything that answers back on your particular IP address. And it does have a really useful information. And I haven't used it in a long time just because I had no need to. But it provides a very useful detailed report back on the connection based upon what kind of flags you set for it. And I think there's quite a few different UIs that you can plug in front of that as well, whether that be a web UI or even I think there's a graphical UI for it now as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there are all kinds of utilities you can put on top of Nmap, but in its barest form, it's a really nice utility. I use it a lot to make sure that Windows firewalls are configured properly on PCs. You can confirm which ports are open, which ports are closed, whether you have a a source target, scope set correctly, things like that. Really handy for figuring that out. And I have also used it in kind of like the ARP scanner thing where you're trying to figure out what's on the network. You can actually do an entire subnet and just like ping out, like you can do a -P0 and pick a port like port 80 and just see every device on a network that's responding on port 80, even if it doesn't ping back. Because it will check ARPs and see if they exist, and whether or not you can actually get an echo reply, it will check ports anyway and see if they're available. You can also do UDP port scans and stuff like that to make sure there's not like SIP listeners or something that's just hanging out on UDP ports like BitTorrent clients and whatnot. You can see a lot of information using NetMap. It's very flexible and very robust. And if you're trying to figure out any kind of connectivity issue, particularly with any client on your local network, Nmap is probably an invaluable tool and why it's still so widely used.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next tool is, I don't have it on my computer, but it's called IFTop. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
I use this one a little bit now and then. It's not something that I pull out of the toolbox every single day, but I always put it on machines, especially servers or anything where I need to make sure. It's super handy for like a web service. So like if you're running an Apache server, for example, what you can do is, for you and for most people, it would just be a yum install or a DNF install or a apt install, IFTop. And what it does is it gives you a list, kind of like a process list, kind of like what Top does, but instead of showing you CPU processes, it shows you network connections. It will tell you how many network connections are at your machine at any given time. It's a live view, and it will do a top down for number of connections and number of bytes sent. And so you can, like, if your server is running slow or something, like your Apache server is not responding or whatever, you can see where all these packets are coming from, whether you're getting hammered, whether you've got 1,000 sockets open, stuff like that. And I find it, very handy to see if a machine's being attacked, and that's what I use it for mostly. But if you just want to see what kind of traffic is coming into your machine and where from, and what kind of traffic is going out for that matter, IFTop is a pretty handy utility.
This will give you more information than what you can see in, like, let's say, Nmon or something like that.
I don't even know what that is.
Nmon, really?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. I won't mention it. Nmon's sort of a front end to a bunch of different utilities. So you can see network, IO, and a bunch of other things on your particular computer. I'm surprised you don't know that one.
I guess I'm surprised I don't know that one too. I'm using it right now for the first time. So
yeah, you go into Nmon and then you type in like stupid, like N is for network or something like that. So you can do Nmon. Let's see, and then you can do CPU, network, anything else. It's I've actually used that a lot. I don't even know what the front end for it is. But
it looks like curses. But the thing is, like if you do Nmon N and you see, like, you're getting your counters, your packets in and stuff like that. But if you use IFTop, you actually see the connections and the directions. So if you have a second to install that, you definitely should check that out.
Yeah, I'm going to. I can't use it here. I have it actually. Well, yeah, whatever. It's not. I'll need to install it on the computer. I'm not using it for this.
I think I think you might find it a little more interesting than Nmon. You'll see when you actually run it. It actually shows the connection. It shows the source, shows the destination, shows how many packets have traversed, and it actually shows you the direction of the traffic. Like literally, like a greater than pointing one direction, a greater than or less than pointing the other direction shows you where the packets are coming from, where they're going to, how much, and it does it, like I said, in a quantity top down. So the top senders and top receivers will be at the top, so you can see, which Chinese IP address is pummeling your box.
Yeah, so just like an HTOP or something like that, it shows you the processes and whatnot. So
yes, absolutely. And there's also another one called IOTop, which is totally aside because there's nothing to do with networking, but it does the exact same thing for memory and disk read and write. Like anything that requires I/O, like whatever process is writing most to your hard disk and reading most from your hard disk, or writing to swap or anything like that, I/O top is the same thing for that.
And that would expose exactly which app or which
process.
Yeah, which process ID. Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to have to check both those out now. I've been using the really weak utility apparently with Nmon because it shows sort of like the high level, the 50,000 foot view of those particular things. So that's really cool. I'm going to have to check those two things out. The next two utilities we have are all DNS related. So you want to go over these?
Well, the first one most people are probably familiar with is NS lookup, which is name server lookup. That allows you to query a computer that does DNS and do your name resolution, whether it's your A records, your quad A records, your PTRs, anything like that. It actually when you start up NS lookup, it actually creates you're in like a little shell, and you can type the commands in there. And if you don't do that, you can do everything from the command line as well. And it's kind of useful. I find the syntax a little clunky with NS lookup, so I don't particularly use it that much, but I do use dig. I think dig is an easier command to use. Basically, the way I use it is you type dig, the record you want, and the host, and you get output. That's all it is.
The nice part about NS lookup that I like is that on the fly you can switch which DNS server you're actually looking at for that resolution.
You can do that with dig too. All you have to do with dig is you type, like, for example, let me give you let me say I wanted to use Google to do the lookup instead of my own server. You would do like dig, let's say quad A record for bluecows.com at 8.8.8.8. And it uses Google to do the query instead of whatever servers are default configured.
Oh, that's cool. That's neat. So yeah, if you use NS lookup and you just do NS lookup and not type in anything, you get like a little command line, so an application interface basically to it, and you can just type in server space and then the server you want to use, and then you can just type in the domain or whatever address you're looking for. So, but like this is kind of cooler. Yeah, I didn't know you could do the at and which address. That's actually really slick.
It's not, the at's not together, by the way. It's separate. It's dig space, record space, host space at the name. So some implementations might allow you to put the host and the at part together, but it hasn't worked in my thing. The at has always been a space away.
All right, I'll have to play with that. I haven't used that directly on the command line like that. I have used dig before, but normally just high level, just checking things and stuff like that. But knowing your DNS information, those are both two really good utilities to kind of dig into any type of name resolution issues you may or may not be having, depending upon if you changed a DNS entry, or let's say you're using a dynamic DNS on your local box and you just happen to change IP addresses. You can actually see where it's been propagated and stuff like that. And if somebody's having an issue, you can also kind of test and see where they're having a particular issue on connecting.
Yep. And I just threw another one in here to put maybe a final point on these utilities, that kind of got into my brain because we were talking about, dig and stuff, is one that I use fairly frequently, which is Whois. This is not necessarily installed by default on your machine, but an apt install Whois away. And a lot of people will use this to find out who owns a domain. You can do like a Whois, LHSpodcast.info, whatever, and it will show you, well, it may show you information and stuff like that, but it will show you the name server records and things like that for the domain. It'll show you when it's going to expire and stuff like that. And a lot of people use it for that. But one thing a lot of people don't do with Whois, which I find really interesting, is it will show you who owns an IP address. You can do a Whois on an IP, and it will return all of the nitty-gritty information. So if, you've been banging with IFTop and you've got a machine that's being hammered on with Apache, and you do an IFTop and you see it's at 52.6.7.33, well, you can do a Whois on that, and it will show you which, country, i.e. China, that is hammering on your machine, which can be useful in some cases, especially if you're going to try and pursue an abuse report or anything like that. So,
hey, that one's an EC2 instance on Amazon. Come on.
Yeah, well, you never know. So,
so that's that's paid to spam you.
Absolutely.
No, I love that. That's great. Yeah, I use Whois a lot. Definitely tracking down if you can even report people, after you've blocked them and stuff like that, going through your blockers list. And occasionally you want to let me see if I can report this person for malicious activity. And especially if they're on a known ISP or whatever, it's always kind of good to track those down and report them. And they normally give you a reporting address too, like an email address or a URL or whatever.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, org abuse ref. That's what you want, right?
Yes.
Abuse. So I think we've substantially beat everybody's head to death with all these utilities. I mean, there's so many of them that I think we don't even think about, and we probably use. I mean, most people probably use ifconfig all the time, right? Just to kind of see, what's my stupid IP address?
Yeah, absolutely. But IP might be a better option than that. IP is very robust. It contains a lot of information that is in other commands and kind of rolls them all into one. And I saw that the neighbor command actually has been written with an OUR as well too. So if you're one of those people who speaks English, speaks the Royal English, then if you type IB neighbor with a U in it, you'll still be get the results.
That's so useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's awesome. That's really cool. Well, I think that's all we have for the topic. I hope this spurs some more feedback on what we got right, what we didn't get right, or what we should have covered and what we missed. So please send us feedback on that, on maybe commands you're using for your networking that maybe we didn't cover, or maybe if there's a utility out there that front ends some of these things that make it even better and easier to manage stuff via the CLI, that would be useful for our listeners. So we'd definitely like to hear those.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any feedback either way, or a utility that you use that somehow we grossly overlooked, please let us know. We'll definitely talk about it. Maybe it's something that we should know about and should have talked about. But I mean, of course, there's probably a million utilities that are out there that do great things that we just don't know about. So, but I think this is a good core.
Yeah, it's definitely a good coverage of stuff. And most of the stuff should be installed on every distribution. There's a few things that may or may not. Sometimes NetTools is not installed, and that's where some of these come from. So you might need to install that. So you'll get prompted that says, oh, you don't have this command. You should apt-get NetTools. So don't be surprised if you went with a minimal install that you don't have some of these tools that exposes some of these commands.
Yep. Absolutely. I've found that a lot of the Debian distributions lately, even the brand new ones, don't come with NetTools installed. Even if you select at the very beginning when you're setting up the server, the basic system packages or system utilities option in task cell, that you still don't get netutils, which to me seems really stupid. I just feel like netutils should be automatically installed no matter what, because right out of the box, you should be able to tell what your IP address is. I guess I'm assuming IP is not part of that package. IP probably works without it, but NetTools is, it's just one of those things you should have.
Yeah. I see we got a few comments. I have no idea what Tony's talking about, but I see KD2WLL is talking about a good follow-up on Firm. So we'll definitely probably talk about firewalls in the future. It's a very large topic. I think that can't be done justice with just covering some utilities. And that's good that you're playing with IFTop. I can't wait till I can have a little time with it myself.
All right, really good. I think this has been a good conversation. We're looking forward to any feedback we get, and of course, we'll address anything that comes up in a future episode and talk about all those utilities that we have somehow forgotten about in this discussion. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our announcements and feedback. I don't have any announcements that I can think of, so we're just going to do one bit of feedback. This was a comment on YouTube. It came in a few days ago, about a week ago, I think, and he says he's a Linux. This is from DemDev, by the way. He says, I'm a Linux newbie, typed in apt install Discord, but it doesn't know where to locate it. How do I make it where you can download it? I also wanted to download stuff from Snap, but it couldn't connect to it. Help. So I responded that snap install Discord is what you would use if you have snapd installed. Otherwise, you would install snapd first by doing sudo apt install snapd. And apparently he tried that and said snapd was already installed. So he tried to install Discord again, but it just simply said unable to connect to Snap Store or something like that. So I'm not sure I can sit here and diagnose why your Snap doesn't connect to the Snap Store. It should.
Yeah, I already responded to it. So
okay,
that was my response, not yours. That's okay.
Which one? Oh, the Snap
first
install Discord.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well,
I just did that 39 minutes ago, or whatever, before the show. But yeah, so the thing I could find if you can't connect to the Snap Store that was recommended on one of the various posts was that you need to do a snap refresh snapd and then a system control restart snapd. Apparently, this will generally fix any issues with your Snap Store connecting. If you're an Ubuntu-based distro and you're using snaps, then installing Discord via Snap is probably the easiest way. I don't even think it's included in the repo. There is a Debian that you can download directly from Discord and install. But again, that comes with buyer beware, because who knows? Who knows if it will run right? I know I have broken installs with it. So if you want to do it via Snap, that's the way to do it. And then to get your Snap Store actually connecting properly, go ahead and try the refresh and then the restart of the snapd. And hopefully that resolves it for you. Otherwise, you can go directly to Discord and download the deb file and install that via apt install and wherever you download the deb file to, and that should get you going. Otherwise, obviously, you can use the web interface and use it inside of a tab inside the browser. But I know you probably want the client, so so those are your options right now. But I did respond with that fix as well to YouTube, which apparently he probably already saw because he responded to the other comment quite quickly.
I will say that when I install Discord on a Linux machine, I always get the deb file from Discord directly. I do not install snaps if at all possible. And the only thing I would say is that every once in a while, I will download it on a machine that is missing one of the required packages to run Discord. And when you do a dpackage I on the package, it will bomb out and say this package is not installed. It's really easy to fix that. All you do is an apt-f install. After that, it will install a necessary package, and then Discord will load fine. And that has always worked for me on every machine I've tried it on. So if it doesn't install by default by using the dpackage command for the deb, it's usually one missing dependency. And apt-f or apt-fix-broken, or not fix-broken,
missing.
Fix-missing will take care of the /issue, and Discord should install fine.
So you use dpackage tac-i for those ones
Yes.
you download manually? Oh,
Yep.
I just use apt. I always do apt install and / the file or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I have dpackage is so ingrained in me. I don't use the apt command for that.
Yeah, I always use the apt command because it automatically grabs anything that's missing.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about you broke everything because it doesn't have dependencies.
It is so programmed into my muscle memory that to apt a packet, like an actual package instead of a package that's in a repo, is like, it feels foreign. Even though I have done it before, I just
Yeah, I probably haven't used dpackage tac-i in probably 5 to 10 years.
All right, so I'm old. All right.
Yeah, I know. It's just I used to do that, and then I always had issues with it, and then I started just using apt because it can consume a file and fix everything automatically, and so it's just always worked. Unless there was something that definitely could not be supported, then it would break there too, and then all bets are off.
Okay, so just do it Bill's way, whatever.
You can do any way you want, but I'm just saying it does work if you just do an apt install and then point it to the actual file in your file system.
All right, fair enough. Thanks, DemDev, for the feedback, and hopefully that'll work for you and you can get on Discord, and we'll see you connected to our server very, very soon. All right, it looks like Cheryl's back just in time to do the social media roundup, so I think we'll go ahead and let her open up her mic and talk about the new subscriber supporters and live participants we have.
Okay, I can do that. So we did not have any new subscribers or Patreons this week, but we did have several Facebook people, including Renan Sneros, Moed Akbar Ahmed, Vanderson, Rodolfo Tagliaferri, Joe Michael, James Barnes, Thomas Clark, Capaquatro Ciode, John Lawson, Carlos Silva, D. Mann, Valerie Gribbencia, and William Haggard.
Somehow you got Lawson out of Johnson, so I'm just going to say John Johnson.
Oh, okay, sorry. I have a dog licking my leg, so that's not helping things out.
Oh, so the L in lick turned it into Lawson.
Yep,
I got it. It makes perfect sense.
So, yeah. On Twitter, we have @Jackie Thomas. On YouTube, we have Zakatuga. On Discord, we have KF0KEP, J. Eric, M0KVI, Project Nexus, KT4KB John, Digital Beat, KD2WLL, and Seldib112. For merchandise sales, there are none. For mailing lists, there's nothing. And for the live chat, we had Ted, WA0EIR, Tony, K4XSS, Winston, KD2WLL, Robert, W1RCP, and Darren, VK6EK. And that is it.
Yep. Sorry, just got the VK6EK in there under the wire because I just noticed he was in the chat. So.
Yeah, I was waiting for anybody else to pop up. So.
Yeah, I see we got one more that joined Discord while we had the show going on there, and that was Jasmine as well. So it'll probably get missed because it was on the day of the show.
Oh, the Celta EB12 was on the day of the show too. So let me go ahead and include Jasmine. So, all right, there, all done. And KD2WLL Winston is someone who just got into the Discord and said he was going to join tonight, and he's here, and he's already participated in the show. So that's awesome. So thanks for being here. Glad to have you on board. And with that, we have come down to the end of the show. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up as the dogs continue to bark in the background. Hopefully that hasn't been coming through too bad, but it is what it is. The house is open, the weather is beautiful, and we're not going to be shut up and living in air conditioning anymore. So anyway, this has been our deep dive episode number 482 of Linux in the Ham Shack. And we thank you for being here, and we'll hope to catch you for the next one. I'm Russ, K5TUX.
I'm Cheryl, W5MOO.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD 73.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a community-sponsored podcast. Our website is located at lhspodcast.info. You can support the podcast by visiting the LHS Patreon page at patreon.com/LHS Podcast, or by using the contribute list on the homepage. We have a presence on Discord, Facebook, IRC, Twitter, and YouTube. You can also drop us an email at info@lhspodcast.info, or leave us a voicemail at 1-909-LHS-SHOW. That's 1-909-547-7469. Visit the online LHS merchandise store at shop.lhspodcast.info for fun and fashionable show-themed merchandise. Until next time, remember to always heed your hedonism.